So, yes, Krishna, I do record the lessons, despite what that just appeared like. Sorry, still getting used to you guys in general. Just one moment. Okay, so I also have my LinkedIn profile there as well, just in case you wanted more information about me. There's not a lot to really know. Well, professionally, there's a lot because I've worked a lot of jobs, but I mean, as an instructor, I've been instructing with Georgian for 6 years almost now. This is my, I can't remember how many semesters. I want to say almost 17th semester or something like that, 16th, 17th semester that I've taught. I've taught PHP countless times. I've taught, usually they give me JavaScript because a lot of people don't really like teaching the JavaScript, but I do. So usually I teach JavaScript, intro to JavaScript, as well as JavaScript frameworks. And that's the language that I tend to work with in my day job, as well as JavaScript and Node and Mongo and databases like that. I do work with MySQL too, though. However, I don't work a lot with PHP in my day job, but I do know it pretty well. There's sometimes that I will forget something and I'll have to look it up, but for the most part, I am quite skilled in PHP. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. You like JS? Well, that's good, Scott. Are you guys the web program, or are you the computer programming program, or are you a mix? Computer programming? Okay, so yeah, it's good that you like that, because you've got, what, 2 courses in it, full? Or now I think there might be 3 courses in JavaScript? I can't remember if it's 2 or 3. But yeah, you'll get at least 2. So one of them will be an intro to JavaScript where you actually just learn the introductions of it. And then the second one will be JavaScript frameworks, which will, depending on the teacher you get, will likely either be React or Angular as well as Node. And then working with Mongo databases. So yeah, so we're going to use PHP in this class though, in MySQL. React, please. Yeah, Jesse, you know what? I love React myself. I use it every day. However, I won't be teaching next semester. I've actually decided to take a semester off so I can get more skilled with my current role. I just started this role at LMG. I was working for a company called Mintent out of Barrie, but due to COVID, they wound up folding. So they let go a whole bunch of people, so I had to find something else. So I wound up starting with LMG, and it's just getting a little bit used to this role because I used to be a senior software engineer. So this role is quite a bit different as it's in more project management than it is in development. So it's going to take a little bit to get used to, so I figured I'd take a semester off. Though next semester you guys would be on co-op, won't you? Likely. Yeah, so you might get me anyways. When you get back, I'll be doing... Oh, right, there are no co-ops, that's true. But when you guys come back from your break, I will be likely teaching JavaScript again. All right, cool. Let's get into the weekly learning. So I'm still going to use Jess's shell, right? So we'll just use the same shell. That's what this thing's called, by the way, the shell. I'm going to use Jess's shell. We're working on module 4 by the looks of it. So you guys are doing form validation. So that's, I taught this actually a couple weeks back, but that's fine. We can do it today. And then APIs next week, which is pretty cool. So I don't generally do APIs because I cover APIs in the JavaScript frameworks quite intrinsically. We actually build our own API. But I just want to match what Jess is teaching and not veer too far from it. So we'll be doing APIs next week for sure. But we're going to start with week 8. And so all of her... all of the like course pieces that you guys are doing for gradables, like your quizzes, your what else is there? There's quizzes, labs, projects, all that stuff is still the same. None of that's going to change. So I was looking, Jess has 2 phases for your project, and so you got a phase 1, phase 2. That's still the same. I will be taking over the marking for your phase 1 projects. If you submitted an invite to Git for Jess, you're actually going to need to resubmit an invite to me. So if you could invite me to your project, we'll talk about that on the break. I'll give you my Git details so that you can send me the invite. But you'll need to forward the invite to me so that I can actually mark those this weekend. But yeah, so I think you guys have a lab in phase 1 that still need to be marked, and that's it, if I'm correct. I might be wrong. I think that's what it is. But yeah, I can mark those. All right, so this week we're going to be talking about validating forms. So you guys have already done CRUD. You've done create, read, update, and delete. I saw that. So now we're just going to start implementing the actual validation into those ones as well. Oh, it's your lab 3 that isn't marked. Okay, so yeah, I'll mark your lab 3s for you as well. Oh, you guys do have co-op. You were just kidding around. Haha, you tricksters. Tricky Ricky. All right, so let's take a look at the lecture content for tonight. We have the lecture content week 8. So I've added in my own notes here as well, just so you are aware. This is likely what I will be following for tonight. I will look through Jess's slide deck as we go through, and I'll present her slide deck. But when it comes to actually doing the example, I'll be using my own notes for that particular example part. Okay, just so that you have a heads up. However, just to note, this is to augment your learning. This is not to replace. So don't, skip a class and then just look at the notes. You would definitely want to watch the YouTube video. Because my notes will definitely be quite a bit different than what Jess is doing right now, just to give you a heads up. So use it to augment your learning, don't use it as a replacement. Just to give you some clarification there. All right. So yeah, we're into this thing. Okay. So form validation, sanitization, and normalization. I like how she does sanitizing and normalizing. I just say Asian. I like Asian. So validation, sanitization, normalization, user data. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So today's schedule, cool things. So I like this cool little list that Jess has created where it just kind of shows you some demonstrative things that exist out in our industry. So I will go over those. Week 7 review. I won't be doing your week 7 review just because I don't really fully know what you guys covered. I think you did search, if I remember correctly. You guys did like a little search thing and you kind of ran through search. We're going to run through search again anyways because we're going to be doing some authentication and building out a CRUD system. So we're definitely going to use search. Oh, you did search with wildcards. So you use right, inside your SQL queries? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so we're going to take a look at form validation tonight. We're going to take a look at how we sanitize user data and why we sanitize user data. We're going to take a look at normalizing user data as well so that we can guarantee what we're putting into our databases in the correct format. And then we're going to recap your weekly tasks. So I'm assuming that basically is covering what we covered tonight. This weekly task piece will be the things that you have to do. I think there's only a quiz for this week. The lab looks like it's next week that it's assigned. And then what we're covering for next week. Cool. So, learning objectives. So, develop scripts that validate form input on the server. Yep. Design, program, and implement web pages that interact with web-enabled databases, performing simple CRUD operations. So, we are going to build some CRUD tonight. And then create scripts that dynamically generate web pages containing valid HTML. Well, that's exactly what PHP does, right? I'm not sure if Jess has mentioned that PHP is a templating language. That's its whole purpose. The idea of PHP is that you can use it to dynamically generate HTML, right? And actually have some code in there as well so that you're not having to redundantly create the same HTML sections or segments over and over again. PHP provides you this whole capability of building these dynamic views, basically HTML views with your PHP kind of injected inside of it. PHP is cool that way. It's very, very cool that way. So cool things. Let's take a look at our cool things. So 25 free resources. Well, let's open this link in a new tab. I love Medium articles, except for every so often Medium likes to flag you and say, hey, you don't get any more reads on this particular site anymore because these are behind a paywall. So let's take a look. So our 25 free resources to learn web development. HTML. I mean, there's so many resources to learn HTML. My favorite is MDN. I saw Jess use it in one of her videos, the Mozilla Developer Network. That's like my first go-to whenever I'm trying to learn something about JavaScript or learn something about HTML. Or even just things about security or anything like that. I tend to treat it as my book of truth. So I like to use MDN, right? Mozilla Developer Network. Code Academy, fantastic resource for learning HTML as well. They have the nice little interactive widgets so that you can actually write your code in the interactive widgets. I have a whole bunch of kids, and they all do that Code Academy thing in school right now. Like, and as young as my youngest, which is he's in grade 2, and in grade 2 they're already doing Code Academy as well. So right out of the gate. HTML5, CSS3, some full course for Free Code Camp. Free Code Camp is pretty cool. Yeah, there's like tons and tons of these on teaching CSS and HTML. You guys would have had a CSS and HTML course. Maybe you've had 2 currently. Usually there's like a intro one, and then there's like an advanced one where you learn like advanced CSS. UI, UX, that's user interfaces as well as user experience. So that's not so much design. Design's a small part of that. That's more about how the person interacts with your website. UX is a very, very important thing that we don't... The funny thing is programmers don't really consider UX as being a them problem. They kind of view UX as like, oh, that's, the designer's problem. However, UX is something that you also need to consider when you're developing applications. Like, hey, another developer is going to be using my code, right? So that's a user experience, and you want to make sure that the code you're building is a good user experience and that they're not cursing you, right? And yelling your name out into the ether because they're mad. UX beginner courses, JavaScripts, right? To be honest with you, the best source for JavaScript, like I said, is MDN. Second to that is JavaScript Info, which is a great source for understanding JavaScript intrinsically, so underneath the hood, being able to actually understand what's happening under the hood with those functions. Eloquent JavaScript, yeah, there's like tons of good resources here. And there it is, Mozilla Developer Network, my favorite one. Yeah, W3 Schools, be cautious with W3 Schools. Sometimes the information on there isn't 100% accurate. I would definitely look at Mozilla Developer Network first, and then if you're having difficulty understanding, W3 Schools does tend to put it in a more, what's the word I'm looking for? It tends to handhold a little more than MDN does. So it just depends on the type of learner you are. Let's try another one here. 27 best tutorials to learn PHP in 2021. Why learn PHP? Well, I saw that Jess showed you in the video last week, 79% of the internet is currently using PHP. And that is true. That's because it's one of the simplest languages to learn, right? It's one of the simplest ones to learn. It's also one of the simplest ones to screw up. So much of the internet loves PHP because it's so easy to learn and get into, and you can build it right away. But we also have to consider why so much of the world is using PHP. WordPress is a huge pusher for that, right? Because every mommy blogger ever, or every craft person, or every small business is using WordPress in order to build out their enterprise. Because WordPress is a great intro into being able to develop in the web, but in a more interactive and friendly way, especially if you're not much of a coder. So we have to understand that a lot of that 79% are people who, they're just putting up sites for very small businesses, a lot of SMBs. So that's one consideration. What I would also do, though, is look at the current trend of what the industry is using. The trend is currently looking like Node and JavaScript frameworks obviously are really high on that trend because they're easy to scale, they're cheap to scale, developers are plenty, so it's easier to find developers. The other ones that are big still are the old ones, right? Like Java is still really big, C# and .NET is still really big. So those are ones that are still out there. The ones that are kind of dying off are like Ruby on Rails is kind of dying off. Just because it's so hard to find developers. Ones that say they're popular, but unfortunately the industry doesn't use it very much, are like Rust and Golang. Super popular languages, but it's hard to find developers in them, so not a lot of projects being developed in that. The official PHP manual, still, to my understanding, one of the best sources for when you're trying to learn PHP. It's written really well. It's got a huge community that adds into it. One thing to note when you're looking at the PHP manual, scroll down to the comments because a lot of information can be in those comments that helps you solve whatever your problem is. W3 Schools, PHP the right way. This is I would consider this one of the main ways you should read about PHP next to the the manual. It's a really, really good resource. It teaches you not only about PHP, but also design patterns that you should be considering when you're building in PHP. PHP is an OOP language, even though we don't teach it as an OOP language in this course. It is an OOP language. It has classes, it has interfaces, it has traits, it has all those little pieces that you would get from a normal object-oriented programming language. Those are built into PHP, and you can build with PHP using OOP principles, right? So the right way is definitely one way to learn PHP that I would suggest. It helps you to be a better programmer than the person building a small SMB site with WordPress, if you ask me. And then Code Academy and stuff, yeah, those are all good as well. All right. Did I lose my resource here? See, I keep clicking, and I shouldn't click them because they're not set to navigate properly to anything. I should right-click or control-click, which opens a new tab in case you didn't know that. Constraint validation. So the creation of web forms has always been a complex task. What are we talking about here? Right, using semantics. So when you guys were doing your HTML class, you likely talked about semantic web, building in HTML and trying to maintain your semantics. Semantics means that your code actually has real-world meaning. So when you're writing a paragraph, you use a p tag, and that actually represents a paragraph in the real world. Or when you're writing a table, you use a table tag because that represents that. But then you can go even further and use things like the nav tag, which represents navigation, or a section, or an article, things like that. The semantic web is super important for understanding how semantics work and why we use them, which is really helping computers better understand what we as people understand, or how we read that particular content. It helps the computer to understand what that content is as well, especially things like Google, right? So the constraint validation, the creation of web forms has always been a complex task. While making up the form itself, it's easy to check. Is this the thing about the... Oh, yeah, okay. So it's built-in browser validation. So your browser, which is really awesome because like 10 years ago, I want to say, is it that long? Yeah, about 10 years ago, we didn't really have built-in browser validation. We would have to load in a validation library to do client-side validation. So this is the validation that happens in the form. You're filling out your form, you forget a field, you hit submit, and all of a sudden your cursor jumps up to that field and says, hey, you forgot to fill out this field. That's what this constraint validation API is for. And it's done by so many different little pieces. We're actually going to look at this quite a bit tonight, so not really necessary to read this particular one, but is cool. Bootstrap themes, I'm not even going to click on that. You can use Bootstrap. I mean, there's so many different theming libraries out there. I love Bootstrap myself, and they just upgraded recently to Bootstrap 5, mostly because I'm a crappy designer, so I like Bootstrap because it makes my stuff look nice. But I mean, it always looks like Bootstrap, right? Like, it's so easy to tell a Bootstrap website. You can usually tell it in like 10 seconds flat, because they all kind of look the same. Same as WordPress. I find WordPress always looks the same too. And Shopify now. I can usually tell a Shopify site as well. But yeah, so Bootstrap themes. There's also Material. Material is a really good design theming class thing that you can load in that provides a whole bunch of CSS stuff. Foundation is another one. When you get into things like React and stuff, there's ones called Grommet, which is really good. There's a whole bunch of them out there. If you're not a very good designer and that's not your strong suit, then I would definitely recommend using one of the theming libraries because it will help you be able to make your code look cleaner, right? Not your code, sorry, your interfaces look cleaner so that people aren't hung up on that particular part. And the cat API. What is the cat API? Cats as a service. So not SaaS, it'd be CAS, I guess then? CAS. Because every day is Catter Day. Cool. Public Service API is all about cats. They actually have a paid tier. So you can, get a lot more cat information on your paid tier. We may want to, we may want to ask about volume pricing. If there's enough of you that want to do this, we can definitely talk about volume pricing so that we can all join the cat API. That's cool. I don't really like cats all that much. I don't mind cats. I have a cat. She's I'm going to put it frankly, she's a dick. She's so mean. She does really mean things to people. She likes to scratch the kids, and she likes to shove things off shelves. So yeah, she's just a dick. All right, so let's. We're not going to recap. You guys did search. We're going to do search too, so don't worry about it. We're going to do search often. You guys understand search. I mean, search when it comes to PHP and working with the MySQL database all boils down to that, right? Like. As long as you know how to use like, yay, you know how to do search. Search actually gets more complex than what we cover in this course, to be honest. Like, for example, at LMG, we don't roll our own search. Actually, no company I've ever worked for ever rolls their own search. The reason being is because search has a lot of little pieces to it that there's a lot of little psychology pieces to it, and it requires a lot more understanding of data and content before you actually build out search systems. So there's people that already deal with that. Companies like Solr, S-O-L-R, they build search platforms that you actually implement into your system, link it up to your database, and then it uses machine learning to go through all of your data and actually create categorizations around your data so that it can be searched faster and better and more, what's the word I'm looking for? Probably more reliably, right? So that when a person types in cat, for example, it actually brings back, articles about cats, but not just cats, about pets and things like that as well. About, dander and the effects of allergies. It'll bring back all that information so that you understand. Yeah, exactly, Scott. It's an entire industry in itself. Another really big one that you guys may have heard of is Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is one of the giants. Same idea though. It indexes your database. It uses machine learning to be able to understand what your data is, what the context of your data is, and then builds a huge search database for you that when your people, like when your users or clients are actually searching your data, it hits that database, and then that database returns back the data to those clients. So yeah, Elasticsearch and Solr, they're probably two of the biggest. There's other ones. I mean, if you really want a brain teaser, building your own search so it logically makes sense is a real task. It's really, really tricky once you actually get down into it and start building it out. It isn't just as simple as typing in like, unfortunately. It gets a lot more complicated. However, the search using like is a great way to filter. Filter is an awesome thing. That's where I use things like to filter out my data and stuff like that. One of my job, we use Elasticsearch for our main database. Yeah, same at LMG. Well, actually at LMG we use Solr, but we will be using Elasticsearch going into a new system that we're releasing. And then at my other job at Mintent, we used Elasticsearch as well. Yeah, Elasticsearch is pretty cool. Very difficult to set up. That also leads to the whole concept that if you like setting up computers and you enjoy, implementing security and setting up things like Solr or Elasticsearch or VPCs and stuff like that, look at getting a job into DevOps or developer operations. It pays really, really well, and it's one of the least competitive fields because there's not that many people going into it. Yet it's one of the most demanded fields right now. There's more people looking for DevOps than anything because they're so difficult to find. So you can pretty much almost set your own wage the second you have some skill underneath your belt. You can definitely set your wage on that one. DevOps pays really, really, really well. All right, TuneShare. So I kind of had a little bit of an introduction to TuneShare, and I was looking at it, and it's pretty cool. So basically you guys just, create... Oh, why is it so rare? I don't know. I think it's because a lot of developers, like for example, we don't teach DevOps at the school, at Georgian, in any of the programs. We don't teach developer operations at all. I don't think there's a single course that teaches you how to set up a Linux box, how to set up a web server on that Linux box, how to add security to that box, and then output whatever thing needs to happen on whatever port and setting up ports and all that type of stuff. We don't have courses like that. We have a networking course, but it's not the same thing. Yeah, we've got nothing like that at Georgian, and they don't at Humber. They don't at Centennial. I don't know about Lakehead, but I know when I took university course in 2017 at what's the name of the school? UOIT, but it's not called that anymore. When I went there, they didn't teach us anything about setting up boxes either. Again, it's just programming. That's all it ever was just programming. So DevOps seems to be one of those things that unless you learn it on your own, then it's likely you don't know it. That's just why it's so rare, I think. It's just not enough people are taking the time to learn it. I think if you took information technology at UIT, you would learn that. That would help you to become a developer operations. But if you took information technology, there might be other jobs like internet security and stuff like that you would likely do instead. So that might be part of the problem. All right, so I look at TuneShare. So basically you guys add in your first name, last name, email address, the genre that you're looking for, and the song, and hit submit, and then that creates a record. Super simple CRUD system. Makes perfect sense to me. Jessica's live shares there. I pulled down this Git repo and I just kind of worked on it a little bit. Yeah, you got functional CRUD in there, I saw. You can't search for anything in particular. So you can't actually type into the search bar. There isn't a search bar. You can't type into a search bar and actually look up a song or anything like that. And then the other issue, this is a big issue actually. You can, so this isn't the only issue I noticed with it. So any user can edit or delete a song, but any user can enter in their information again and create another song, right? So instead of having the songs associated with that user, you're actually creating a brand new record for that user each time. So every single time you want to add a new song, you have to create another song with all of your details in it. It would be really cool if we had a way for you to log in, for example, and then you could add in your songs, and your songs would just stay under your name. But then we can make those public so people could search for them and stuff like that as well. But that's a future problem. So adding search. Users should also be able to access, filter the exact information they need. So did you guys do this? Did you actually do the search implementation into your TuneShare? Oh, you did? Oh, okay. That isn't currently live on GitHub. Oh, you did the implementation into your project. So how is that working exactly? Like, are some of you doing TuneShare as your project and then some of you are doing your own thing? Lab 3. Thank you, Attila. So Lab 3 is that the way it works? Is all these labs are basically TuneShare? Gotcha. Cool. Oh, but you... Oh, no. Some say no. Lab 3 is ours. Gotcha. Like a string of diehard sequels. Okay. We might veer away from TuneShare. I haven't decided yet, but we may veer away from TuneShare. Just because it's not my project and I don't really know what Jess's vision is with it, so we might veer away from that. I like to just kind of do modular, single, get it done in a class kind of stuff. But my tunes... I know after you just implemented search, Jesse, now what are you going to do? All right, example time. Startup company, risky jobs. Oh yeah, I saw the risky jobs thing you guys did. So that's kind of what I thought her classes worked like. So you guys would do an example in class, and then you would implement that example into TuneShare or into your projects or whatever, right? Is that basically kind of what happens? Cool. So I created an example for tonight's class. So that's good that I did that. Yeah, where title equals user search. Yep, too specific. All right, so this is where you guys got into the whole search thing. Started talking about the percent wildcard. So interestingly enough, when you guys work in SQL, you're going to find that when you go out into the world that there's multiple different types of SQL databases. So many, right? But the three big ones that you're likely going to interact with, four actually I would say, is MySQL, PostgreSQL, right? Or PostgreSQL, so it's just hard to say. That's a really big one. SQLite is another one. A lot of people use it for testing databases. And then MS-SQL, right? Which is Microsoft's version, which you have to pay for. So all of these have little subtleties to their search wildcards. So MySQL uses like, but Postgres uses I like. So that's because if you want to make it so that it's case insensitive, you have to add the I to the like in order to make it case insensitive. Stuff like that. Whereas I think with MySQL, like just works across the board regardless. Will we go over search again today? I wasn't planning on it. We will be going over search again in the future, though, quite a bit. Because we're going to add search, like I do a whole thing where we do search, filter, and what's the other one? Sort, search, and filter. Those three things. So I will find a way to implement that into a class. I don't know if that's a part of your... I'll have to look. I don't know if that's actually a part of like your whole course outline, if you guys do sort, search, and filter. But we should do sort, search, and filter, because those are common tasks. All right, and that brings us into form validation. What time is it? 3:35. So, what is form validation? Okay, so when we talk about validating, right, validating data, we have to do it from two perspectives, right? So the one perspective is on the client. So when we're validating data in the client. So what is the client? Well, this browser we see right here is a client, right? Where is it? Steam. That's a client, right? Steam is a client. Origin is a client. Epic is a client. Those are clients. Anything that basically speaks to a server is a client, right? So we'll use the browser because that's what you're commonly, that's what you guys usually associate with client-side code, right? The browser, right? When we load a form into our browser, we generally want to be able to validate that data before we send it off to the server. But there's a couple of things to note about how that actually works. Form validation, when we work with form validation, it's really just a user experience, right? So remember I was saying it's always good to think of the user experience. How is the user feeling? And it really is based on emotion, right? How is the user feeling about this particular process that you're making them do? So when they fill out their form and they click submit, and you navigate that user from their form to another page and then say, oh, no, you know what, your first name, you didn't fill it out. And then you're like, you got to go back and fill it out again. So they click the back button, they fill out their name, and then they click submit again. And then it's like, oh, sorry, you know what, you didn't fill out your last name. You need to fill out your last name. So the user goes back and they fill out their last name, and then they click submit, and then you're like, so close, but you kind of missed this checkbox you got to fill in. By this point, the user's like, you know what, I'm done, I'm out. Unless it's the government websites that work kind of like that. If it's the government websites, they're like, I still have to do this stupid thing. So they'll fill it out anyways. But that's a bad user experience, right? That's a terrible user experience. You shouldn't make the user have to go somewhere in order for them to know that what they've done is wrong. So instead, you want to give them a good user experience, which is why we do form validation. What form validation does is it reviews the fields and tells them some sort of information about what's wrong, right? This is what's wrong with your field. You forgot this. This field is required. Something like that. You need to give them some sort of interactive information. Usually you draw their attention to it using focus or something like that, but you basically let them know that they're missing this thing and they need to fill it out. So why do we need to validate? Well, we validate for, yes, to ensure we get the right data in the right format, right? That's super important. I don't want an email address that's just a bunch of characters and no @ symbol and no domain and no extension, right? We need to make sure that those pieces are in there, that I have their alias, I have their @ symbol, I have their domain, right? And then I have their top level extension. I need those pieces in order to be able to send them an email address. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a true email address, right? But at least I'm kind of doing some due diligence to get the format correct. To protect our users, yeah, validation does protect our users as well. Not necessarily on the front end though, but it does definitely protect us on the server side. And to protect ourselves, yes. So this validation slide here must be covering both client and server. That is true. So the reason why we validate on the client is for good user experience. It helps the user to know what's wrong with their form before we send them off to actually process that information. Once they filled out the form, though, and they click submit, we need to do our due diligence and process that information on the server as well. And the reason is because we can't rely on what we're getting from the client. We have to pretend that every client, and I kind of like this, every client is either a hacker or a complete and utter dumbass, right? That's literally how we need to treat them. And that may seem pessimistic, like, oh, all users are dumbasses. But we kind of need to think of it that way. And the reason why we need to think of it that way is because we need to protect our data. Our data is our holy grail, and that's the thing that we are always constantly protecting. We are protecting from things like SQL injections, which is where a user actually hacks the form and types in some SQL, and then they hit submit, and that SQL comes back, and we process that SQL, oh God, and delete every record from our database, right? Or like Target did, dump their whole user database out to the user so that they were able to copy all that information, including credit cards and raw passwords. Yeah, the more you code, the truer it definitely will get, Jennifer. That's for sure. You will definitely experience that over and over again. Don't hate the user, though. Try to avoid that paradigm that I find that a lot of programmers get into, where they're like, I hate the user, screw the user. Don't hate the user. Just try to understand them better, and don't trust them. Don't ever trust them. They can't be trusted. So anyways, that's one issue, right? SQL injection. Another one is cross-site scripting, and this is where we're actually doing this particular portion, protecting our users. So let's take a look at this example. We have a WordPress site, and we have a comments field at the bottom of our WordPress site. And Johnny Hacker comes along, and Johnny decides that he wants to collect all of people's cookie information from their personal cookie stash. Things like, their session IDs for Netflix and stuff like that. So Johnny Hacker types in, this little bit of JavaScript that says basically send your cookies to this address through this API. And he writes this little bit of JavaScript, and then he submits it as a comment in my WordPress form. WordPress, in its infinite wisdom, at least 10 years ago it was like this, just takes that and stores it right into the database without ever sanitizing it in any way. So this script, this little chunk of JavaScript is sitting in the database and nobody knows about it. User comes along to come read the comments about a post. And the JavaScript, because JavaScript doesn't render as raw text in the browser, it actually gets interpreted by the browser, loads up in the background, and nobody can see it. This comment now is sitting there in the background, and no one can see it, just running JavaScript. And it dumps this poor person's cookies and sends them off to Johnny Hacker. That's cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting is super bad, so we need to protect ourselves from cross-site scripting by stripping out tags and stripping out odd characters and stuff like that. The good news is that PHP provides us ways to do that simply. So how do we validate? Well, like I said, we have two versions of validation. We have client-side validation and we have server-side validation, and both are super important. So based on what I've said, is client-side validation enough? The answer, yeah, exactly. The answer to that is hell's no. Client-side validation is not enough. Ever. Never, ever. It's not enough to protect you, it's not enough to protect your user, and it's not enough to protect the holy grail of data. Exactly. HTML validators are not foolproof. In fact, you can go to a form that has client-side validation, and in the form, up in the top bar, open it up in your developer tools, type in no validate, hit enter, which just automatically applies it, and then fill out the form however you want and click submit. And it will go through. And all that wonderful Chrome client-side validation that happens in the browser gets circumvented entirely, right? Or you can go to a form and disable JavaScript and then just fill out the form and send it. Or you can avoid all of that and open up something like Postman or Hopscotch.io or even just a curl request and actually send a post request to the forum's action directly. So never actually using the form at all. And then that, whatever that server is, you're hoping that, if at least if you're a hacker, you're hoping they have no validation on that server and they'll just take your data raw, right? So yes, you definitely want to make sure that when you're setting up your forms, that you're not relying on client-side validation, that you have a server-side implementation as well. So adding validation to our TuneShare application. Okay, well, we're not doing that yet. We likely will. If we have time left over, we can open up TuneShare and add validation to it. I mean, I'll leave it up to you. We'll take a vote. But otherwise, we'll just do it to the thing that I created. All right, so we'll pull that down. We'll add it to our things. We'll get our servers up, and then we'll take a small 10-minute break. Any questions about any of the stuff that I just talked about, though? We're going to talk about it as we build as well. No? Cool. So I kind of do my classes a little bit different than Jess. Jess has those slide decks. I don't generally do slide decks. I usually just get right into doing code, but I want to kind of follow her pattern from week to week because that's what you guys are used to up to this point. So we'll follow the pattern. We'll do that recap kind of, or just not recap. We'll do that overview, and then we'll get into doing the code. So if you go to week 8 and you go to code examples, I think I put it in. I want to say code examples. Yes. You'll find a little file in there, or a zip file, right, called starter files. Go ahead and click that, and that should download it for you. And then I'm going to show in the folder, because it goes to my downloads directory. It says that quiz 8 is due Sunday the 19th. Don't you mean it's due Sunday the 21st? Yeah, well, Sunday is definitely not the 19th. It is definitely the 21st. Friday is the 19th. Hold on. Let me open the quizzes. See, the weird thing is that you shouldn't be able to choose the 19th. Where's her due date set? Right here. Yeah, so she has it set for Friday. I can just shove that over to Sunday. Is it usually due on Sundays? Oh, you see, Yulia says no, they're due on Fridays. There we go. We'll leave it as Friday. Does her quizzes... No, they don't close out. So, oh, they do close out, actually. When do they close out? Oh, this one's not actually set to close out, though. So it never hides? Oh, I see. So if you don't do the quiz by Friday, you have to... You can't actually take the quiz after Friday. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave everything the way it is. If for some reason you can't take the quiz and you need an extension, you'll just need to let me know. So you're saying that it's wrong, though, in this thing here. Huh? This is just a link. I don't know where you're seeing that. Where you're seeing the Sunday thing. Oh, right there. I see it. Ah. Yeah, that's not Sunday. That's free day. Free day. There we go. All right, back to what we were doing. So download your starter files. Show in the folder. You'll get the zip file there. Go ahead and right-click on it. Choose Extract All, or however you do your extractions. And then that will give you a starter file. So this is kind of an annoying thing that happens in Windows, and I haven't figured out a way beyond it because I don't use Windows all the time. I use Windows to play games. I use Windows to teach. Otherwise, I use Linux, and that's my day job, is always in Linux. So I haven't quite mastered the compression thing inside Windows, so I always wind up with a folder within a folder, which is kind of annoying. So just dig down until you see all of the files in there. And they should seem familiar because they look pretty much the same as the way Jess sets them up. And then I'm going to open another folder. and I'm going to navigate to where I put my lessons. Now, I'm only teaching one Comp 1006 class, so I'm going to create a new Comp 1006 folder. I'm going to call it Comp 1006 WED02 for you guys. And then I'm going to create a new folder in here. And you guys are on lesson 8, so we'll just call it lesson 8. Or you can call it week 8 or whatever you want to do. I mean, this is all just a suggestion. You don't have to listen to any of this. Then I'm going to take these files that are over here in my starter files and I'm going to drop them into lesson 8. Do you guys use MySQL? Sorry? Will you show us what to do with the MySQL file? Yes. So that was actually literally my next question, Alex. Do you guys use phpMyAdmin, or do you use MySQL Workbench, or do you know how to use both? Okay, so you guys have a SQL class, right? Awesome. Cool, because I don't like phpMyAdmin. I kind of hate it. So I would rather use MySQL Workbench. Yulia, do you have MySQL Workbench though? Oh, you don't have it. Okay, well that's a problem then. Oh, is it a pain to set up? It's not really that big of a pain to set up though. Yeah, we should for relational database. No. Yeah, you use. Yeah, if you have. Yeah, what are you using in your relational database then? Or do you not have relational database right now, Yulia? Yeah, that's what we're going to use right now. We'll just use Workbench. I just like Workbench over phpMyAdmin. It's more direct and it's straightforward. Plus, all we're going to do is literally copy the contacts.sql and dump it into Workbench and run it. That's all I'm going to do. All right, so why don't we do that first? Actually, no. Why don't we start our servers first? Because if we start Workbench without the server, it's not going to work. So, are you guys using... What are you using for servers? Are you using WAMP and MAMP? Yeah. Sorry, I meant my SQL and Apache running on locally. A Raspberry Pi. Are you being serious, Scott? Did you boot up your own Raspberry Pi and set up your own PHP server and everything? That's pretty cool. I like that. That's slick. Yeah. All right, for those of you that are not doing things like that, setting up web servers on Raspberry Pi, is anybody using XAMPP out of curiosity? I have students in the other class that use one of the combination of the three. Nope. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and start up our servers. I don't think I need to show you how. You guys should already know how to start up your servers. But I do use WAMP just to let you know. Use the Docker version. Nice. Actually, getting experience with Docker, it's super, super important thing. I would definitely, because the industry uses Docker so much, it's definitely worth your time to understand Docker and learn it. I think I have students in the other class that are just some are setting up VMs and doing it in VMs as well, but WAMP as well? Awesome. So I'll be using WAMP. Unfortunately, I don't remember MAMP as well in order to tell you where to find your files. I'm assuming, Scott, that if you set up your server on a Raspberry Pi, and Attila, if you would set up yours in Docker, that you already know where to find your files. So I don't think we need to explain that. So I'm going to... So right now, all my files are sitting in my www folder. That's where I've created this. This is the publicly served web folder, right? And then I have this inside. If we ever get a chance, I would like to show you guys how to create a virtual host so that you can actually create a better URL pattern so that you're not kind of doing this nesting. But for now, we'll just leave the nesting in place. So once your server is green or whatever color it turns to in MAMP, let's go ahead and open up Workbench. And we will connect to our MySQL server. So you should have a connection set up for local. So just click on that. And that's the code that we're literally going to do, but I will start with a fresh file. So you guys are using the same database, correct, for every single table you use, and it's called database. Is that correct? Yeah? Okay. So we'll do the same thing. We'll just have the same database. I'll just drop my table, and then we'll create it fresh. Okay, so do you guys already have a contacts table? Like CONTACTS? You don't already have a table in your database called contacts? Okay, cool. So we don't need to prefix it with anything. So now I want to open my code. What code editors are you guys using? I use VS Code. Same? PHP Storm, VS Code? Okay. So probably a mishmash. Awesome. So in VS Code, inside the folder, I can right-click and choose to open with code, and it will actually open that project directly in my code editor. So hopefully yours works kind of the same way. And I will zoom in. And I'm just going to open up the contacts.sql. Hopefully you can see everything okay. I'm using an ultra-wide screen, which kind of shrinks down on people's laptops, unfortunately. And all I'm going to do is just copy this. I'm going to create a new Sql file by clicking the top left corner, the Sql with the little plus sign on it. That'll create a new Sql file. We'll zoom in for you. And then I'm just going to paste it in place. And then I'm going to click execute with the little lightning bolt. And that should have created the table. Now you won't see the table in here. You have to click the little refresh button beside schemas. And then you should see the table. Easy peasy. So I've adopted Jess's pattern of using fname, lname. As we shift, though, we'll be changing those to first underscore name, last underscore name, just because I like to make sure that all of my things, like from the database to the form fields to the referenced bound points and stuff like that, are all the same name all the way through from end to end. Just a little bit of OCD, I think, is my issue. All right, so you should have a contacts table. As long as you have a contacts table and your code is loaded and we're good to go, your server is running, then we're going to take a 10-minute break. We will come back at 4:10. I usually stick around. I am just going to grab a cup of water, but other than that, I usually stick around. If you notice, because I like to pause this so that it doesn't record the whole break. All right, and we're back. Okay, so by now you should have your contacts SQL database created, so that should be good. We're going to leave Workbench open just so we can check it in case anything has gone awry, all right? I am going to dock my browser window over here because we'll be using the browser window quite a bit so that we can verify what's happening with our code. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the code itself because I have given you some starter files, so there is some setup that's already been done for you. So for example, if you open up the index.php page, you'll see that I have some requires in here that connect in the header, only because you guys have already written connect a few times. There is one change I made to the connect, and that's this line here that enables actual error mode. So whenever PDO has a problem with writing to the database or reading from the database, it will actually throw the error properly. Otherwise, what happens is the only error you actually get is during connection. So this will guarantee that we get a proper error. Otherwise, the errors get stifled and you don't know that it wasn't working. So this enables error handling on the actual PDO database, just so you can see that. Otherwise, In our index file, we have the connect. We have a header. The header is just, it's Bootstrap and contact list is the name of the app, and a container is what it's in. You guys, I saw that you were doing a bit of Bootstrap. What else is in there? Then I've got like a contact page. I've got a table that we're going to fill out, but notice no code in the table yet, just because I do it slightly different than Jessica does, so I want to show you the way I do it. And then we have our footer at the bottom. So that's pretty straightforward, right? Do you have any questions about the index file? Anything I need to clear up? No? All right, so we should be able to load this right now inside our browsers. So there's a few different ways you can get to your page, which I'm sure you guys already know how. One way is by just, clicking in the localhost button inside WAMP. I think there's ones that are available for the other ones as well to get there. Once you get there, you're going to have to kind of dig down a little bit. So I have the comp 1006 directory, but my directory's now got Wednesday in front of it and 02. And if you go there, what's kind of nice is it should just load up the directories that are inside there for you, making it a little easier for you to find your stuff. So I'm just going to click on the lesson 8 directory, and that takes me to this wonderful contact page. See what I mean about Bootstrap things look like Bootstrap things? This looks like Bootstrap. So on this page right now, you can literally find these pieces, right? So you're not going to see the connect, but we're definitely loading in the header because Bootstrap is working. So it should be working for you as well. You should see the nice text. It shouldn't look like there's no styling applied, in other words. You should see the contacts header, right? That's what we're looking at here. This HR produces these lines that you see here. They're horizontal rules. I've got a link that says create new contact. Uh-oh, there's an error on the web. Something went wrong. Unknown database. That means you don't have a database called database. Hold on. So in your MySQL workbench, on the left-hand side, do you have a database called database? Okay, so then what that means, that means that you've got a SQL client running. So you have two SQL clients running, essentially. So you have a SQL client running for your workbench. Probably during the installation, you guys installed another MySQL client. And then you have a SQL client running for your, your server, your web server. So you have two SQL clients running is essentially what's happening. So I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of having to correct that. So what we're going to do instead is if you go to localhost and go to phpMyAdmin, you may have to shut off your SQL database inside. Yeah, or you could do exactly what Mahir's saying. You can just create the MySQL data, like the database in. Wait, hold on. Let me read this first. Needs to change login details if they are different. Understood. Same problem. So I connected to my admin. Create database. Yes, thank you. Okay, so that's really weird. The only thing I can think of is that you're running more than one SQL server at the same time. Try closing down MySQL Workbench. Let's start with that. For those of you that are having problems. And then, yeah, create the database through phpMyAdmin. Yeah, and then make sure you copy your SQL over. Like the SQL in the contacts SQL page. Yes, and put the table inside that. That is correct. Yeah, if you, like Drew says, you can use a different database as well, but if you do that, make sure you update the Connect PHP database that you're connecting to, plus whatever your credentials are. This is the other thing too. Right now I have username as root and a password as empty. I think you guys had those set as root and root. Whew. Lots of things. Yeah, it's root for Macs. It kind of forces you to, when you do MAMP, to set up a root password. I'm not serving my database, so I don't know why I need to. MIDI. On my localhost page, I don't seem to have a directory where I can launch my PHP. So on your localhost page, though, right, you're not going to see the directory in here. You'll have to add it to the address bar. So you'll have to add localhost /comp-1006 or wherever you're storing your files. You'll need to put that directory structure in. Right? So I'm putting mine in comp-1006-wednesday-02. And then I have a lesson 8 folder. Yeah, check your file explorer. All right, does anybody still have a downed database? Or are we all up and running? Yeah, that's fine. I don't mind if you use phpMyAdmin. I'm not going to object. Works now? Not yet. MIDI, are you in the file? Like, are you in, like, do you have the PHP website up? Or are you still trying to find it? Okay. This is where virtual virtual host. Jeez, my brain's not working tonight. Virtual hosts come in really handy because then you can just set up that. Yeah, that's for phpMyAdmin. I think MIDI's actually trying to find the starter files. Oh, you were trying to get into phpMyAdmin, MIDI? I'm confused. Are we trying to do database things, or are we trying to access the starter files? That's what I'm trying to figure out. MIDI, are you trying to access the starter files or access the database? Which one? Okay. Access the DB. No, access the starter files. All right. The easiest way to do that, I mean, you had a 50-50 shot, right? The easiest way to do that is navigate to where you put them. Where did you put them? Did you put them on your server? All right, let's walk through that. So when you downloaded the files, maybe I walked through that a little too quickly. Yeah, okay, so you got to move them. So right now they're sitting in your downloads directory. Can you navigate to your downloads directory and you should see all those files, right? Maybe I can hit Control Z and bring them back. Yeah, I can. Cool. Oh, thank you, Steph. That's appreciated. Oh, now I gotta move them back. Hold on. We're gonna get there. Oh, I'm totally under the wrong directory now. It's surprising to say, but when you work with JavaScript, I would argue that it is considerably easier to like build a JavaScript server and everything and run it locally than PHP is, by far. At least from a teaching perspective, it is. Yeah, no worries. Things are as they are. Yeah, you're going to. In whatever semester after your co-op. No, that's a lie, actually. You will learn intro after your semester after co-op. All right. I mean, we're not going to get too far ahead here. All I want you to do is click the Create New Contact link. Just so we can look at the form and talk about it. Oh, hey, there's a little stray bracket. Hopefully you guys already know how to do that. So I did set this up a little differently. You will notice that we have a new PHP page and an edit PHP page. If you click on the new PHP page, you will see that I'm requiring the header again. Because, I mean, why code it more than once if we're only going to use it in the same spot? I mean, our SEO person that we have at LMG would yell at me for literally titling every one of these contact list, but we'll ignore that for now. I've got my footer, I've got this header here with my H1, and then I have this require once form.php. Now, did you guys do the same thing? I can't remember. Do you have like a form.php page that you're including because you use it for both new and edit? No, you don't. So I just extracted it out and I put it in its own file. Hopefully that's not too confusing. It's just the form itself is just sitting inside a form.php. Oh, they're the same. Okay, that's right. I did see that. I like to separate things out by their not discipline, by their concern. So a new stays as its own thing, edit stays as its own thing, and then I like to separate out the processing as well usually. It took a lot to write process.php the way I did, because generally new would point to insert.php, edit would point to update.php, and we would do those as separated things. Because usually you want to try to modularize your code as much as possible, right? And put it in its own encapsulation. It's a little easier to maintain. But I totally understand why Jess did what she did with the process.php. When you're teaching, it's a little easier if you can just kind of see it all as one big file. All right, Matt, Mitty, are we there? Did you get it or not quite yet? Okay, so in the form right now, like I said, I did create a form file, and we're just including it into new. So the new.php will create whatever the form needs to create a new contact. The edit.php will provide the form with whatever it needs to edit a contact. So nothing too extravagant. All of this should seem fairly simple. If we click on the form and load that up, that's where we're going to start. So I want to shrink this window down a bit here. I wish this thing would abide by the things I'm doing. There we go. So here we are in our form, and this is where we're going to start. Right now, if you look at our form, I can literally click submit, and it will go off somewhere, right? No problem. It just, off it goes. Yet, things are not as they should seem, right? We're missing things. We're missing details. So when you're actually creating client-side form validation, it's a two-stage process. One, you almost want to get, it's called an ERD, which is an entity relational diagram. You want that diagram, or at least a table description of your SQL table. And the reason why you want that is because it tells you the limitations of the data, right? So it will tell you specifically what you're expecting to show up into the database. If you open your contacts.sql, we can actually see this. So one, ID int not null. Do you know what not null means? What does not null mean? Exactly. Can't be null, which means I have to provide a value. Exactly. Like Jennifer said, there has to be a value. So we can see which of these fields are required by just looking at this table. We know that we need an F name. We know that we need an L name, right? Those have to be there because they both are not allowed to be null. We have to have an email address, right? Those are required. However, we can get away with not filling out the age or the personal page, which correlates to the URL. We're allowed to leave those blank. That's not the only restriction we have, but we'll start with that one because that one's an easy one. So let's go back to our form.php and we'll make it so that those fields cannot be null. So let's find the F field first. So the name of the field is called F name here, right? And we're going to make it so that this does client-side validation and make it required. And that's as simple as just adding at the end of the HTML tag here, we add the word required. This is called an attribute, in case you guys didn't know that. That attribute basically says that this field must have a value, otherwise it will throw an error. So if I hit submit now, I'll refresh first. If I hit submit, it now comes up with this little box here that says please fill out this field. And it's all because of this required attribute. If I'm down here on email, for example, and I click submit, it will pop back up and force focus on that field and tell me that I need to fill out the field. So let's go ahead and do the other two fields that we need. So last name needs a required. Oh, there we go. That's the reason why we have that stray. I have a value with a bracket in it. We need to remove that bracket out of the word value in last name. And then that bracket will disappear there. So for L name, we're going to add required to it as well. So now if I add in a first name and click submit, it's going to go somewhere because I didn't refresh my page. Let's try that again. Type in ASDF, go ahead, hit submit, and sure enough, it says please fill out this field. Now the one thing to note, it's not going to say it for every single field. It's only going to tell you per field. So that's the only downfall to it. It's going to say, hey, you forgot to fill out this field. So you're like, oh, okay, well, I'll fill it out. And then click submit. Oh, no, you also forgot this one. Right? So that's the only downfall. There are client-side validation libraries that looks a little nicer, though. Means which comes first? Yeah, I guess kind of, yeah. It's like you need to fill this thing out before you do the next one. It is nice, though, when it kind of just populates and says, hey, you're missing these fields, then the user knows which ones are required. It's also usually a good idea as well to create some sort of indication in your form that the field is required. So one thing I like to do when I'm creating fields is I'll add an asterisk to the fields that are required. So I know last name, first name, and email are all required. And if I hit refresh, so that's what this symbol will mean. These fields are required. And then the email we also need to make required as well. So we'll add the attribute required to it, to the tag, and hit refresh. And now if I fill out ASDF for first name, last name, and hit submit, it's telling me to please fill out this field. So that's cool, and that's pretty quick and easy as well. And you know, I've seen many forms that's basically all they do. They just add the required fields, and then you hit submit, and so you have them all filled out, and everything just does what it's supposed to. However, we have other limitations that we defined inside our database. You had to make a bunch of if statements for this. Oh, geez, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty simple with the required. We're going to get a little bit more complex. So if we look back at our context.sql again, so we have not null, which means that it's required, right? That we have to fill that data out. What does this number mean inside the varchar block? Yeah, exactly. Yulia, it's the length. It's the length of characters that is, as Mahir said, the limit. So the maximum length fname is allowed to be is 20 characters. It cannot exceed those 20 characters, right? So that's another thing that we should add to our form, which kind of enforces that the data comes back in the correct length, because we don't want to exceed what our database permits. So if I go back to form.php, I know that first name and last name are 20 and email is 30. So the way I can add that in is beside required. I can add in the attribute max length, make it equal to a value. The value has to go in quotes, even though that feels counterproductive, right? But it has to. And I'm going to say 20. So now this field cannot exceed 20 characters. Once I reach 20, oh right, I have to refresh. Once I reach 20, it will stop and not permit any more characters inside the value. I could always force it though if I want to see it, because right now it's being nice to me and adding in extra things. Why don't I add a value? There we go. I've added my value, and you'll see it's only showing the value is there though. It's sitting in the background, and if I click submit, oh no, it doesn't work. I guess I circumvented the JavaScript. Never mind. I guess the limitation that you see here is the limitation. So we can go ahead and do that to the other ones as well. That creates a decent user experience. So we'll add max length to the user as to the last name as well, and add 20. And then do max length for the email and make it 30. So now these fields won't exceed past the allotted number. So interestingly enough, we still have age to do and personal page as well. Let's take a look at personal page, because age is going to be slightly different. If we look at the personal page, which is actually URL, we have a character limit of 50. So we can go ahead and add that into our field. So we'll scroll down a little bit to personal page. And we're only going to add max length to this of 50 characters. Now URLs can tend to exceed 50 characters, and it's actually not hard for them to exceed 50 characters, so that might be a little too much of a constraint. Ideally, you would probably want to bump that to maybe 100 characters, maybe even 200 characters. That would be excessive maybe, but you want a decent amount that they can add in large URLs, especially if it's something like a LinkedIn profile where it has a bunch of query parameters at the end of it, so that could increase the length of that. So like I said, age works a little differently. We don't necessarily want to do max length, but what we may want to do is a maximum age, right? So we want to set the absolute max age that a person can declare that they are. So in our SQL database, we have it set as an int 3, which means it's allowed to be 3 digits long. That's it, right? So the max number that you could put into that database would be 999. That's the max number. That's a little further than we need to go. So we'll just say max, right? And max denotes the maximum number it's allowed to be. So we'll say the max age you're allowed to be is what? There's a person in Aurelia that just hit 114. I don't know. How old's the oldest person? Hey, Google. How old is the oldest person in the world?
117 years and 41 days.
117 years and 41 days. So why don't we put in, you know what? We'll be optimistic and we'll say 130. Okay, stop talking.
Female at the right age of 100.
She's just going on about it. So 130. So if I refresh, the only thing is, though, is I can put ASDF in here as well, right? And I can click submit. So I'm going to do ASDF, 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 and click submit. And it's going to take it. It's like our limit didn't work. And the reason why the limit didn't work is because our field is set as text. So this is kind of what that constraint thing was talking about. This is not a text field. This is a number field. So I'm going to change this from text to number. And that will enforce it to be max. Yeah, we could definitely do a minimum. We could have a minimum age of 18. So we could do min equals like 18. So you have to be at least a legal adult to fill out as a contact. But because age is optional anyways, you know, I don't know. We could do minimum 1. At least has to be 1. I'm not sure how that affects it, though, if you go to leave it empty. Like, if you leave it blank, let's try it. Let's put in a min equal of 0, right? And I'll fill this out, I'll fill this out, whoops, I'll help if I refresh. I'll fill this out, I'll fill this out, I'll fill this out, and then I'll hit submit. Oh yeah, it seems to be okay with it. It doesn't seem to care. But it seems like I can choose 0, right? Because I said min 0, but I can't go into negative numbers now. So it does restrict me from moving into negative numbers. So one other thing to note, this can also be a decimal, right? And we don't actually want to allow for decimals because we don't want people saying, I'm 1.5 years old, or I'm 1 3/8. So we can restrict that as well by adding a step. And the step basically says, how do you want this to step by? Do you want it to step by 1? Do you want it to step by 0.1, 0, 0, 0.1? So we can say step by 1. And then refresh. And then I think you can still add it in. But when you use these things, they enforce it. I don't know if there's a way to actually prevent a decimal altogether. But step does prevent them from stepping by decimal points. It's actually almost unnecessary because it seems like the default is that anyway, so. So this is cool. So we have our age, we have our first name, our last name, our email address, and our personal page. Can we see any problem with being able to submit this data? Can you see any better user experience points that we should implement? Like, I can submit this with just ASDFs. Can you think of any ways we could improve this? Specifically looking at email and personal page. Yeah, let's do email as a type, right? Because if we change this from text to email, what's really cool is if I fill it as ASDF, like so, and hit submit, it says you must include an @ and email address. ASDF is missing an @ symbol. So it actually does a pattern match against it and says, nope, you didn't add the pattern that's expected here. Please make sure you're using the correct pattern. So we fixed that by just changing the data type to email. So now if I add in the @asdf.com, even though it doesn't care, I could add a whole bunch of extra characters at the end and hit submit, and it will accept it. So again, it's just a user experience thing. It's not necessarily going to be accurate. It will be our responsibility on the server to make it accurate. If you do min 18 and type 1, it accepts it. Is there a way to catch that? So if you do min 18 and type 1. So you're saying if I do 18 like this, sorry. What? Oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry, I misunderstood. So if I do 18, wait, hold on. Sorry, my num lock is always turned off for some stupid reason. So if I do min 18 but then type 1, yeah, it accepts it. There isn't really, because if I go up or down, it won't, but yeah, I can't avoid the typing part of it. I don't know if there's a way to lock the field without getting into more JavaScript to lock it. You could, you can kind of. Actually, I don't know if we can. There's something called pattern, which allows us to actually define a pattern that it has to match. The problem is I don't think it works for, I don't think it works actually for numbers. I think it only works for text. So if I do 1 here, asdf@asdf.com. This is the only problem with adding the form validation. It makes it annoying to test. Oh, no, you can't submit it though. Did you see that? So it says value must be greater. Yeah, that's a regular expression. This says must be a digit and there must be at least 2 of them. Is basically what it says. So yeah, you can use patterns as well, but it doesn't look like the patterns work on numbers. Not that it matters though, because you can't submit it because it freaks out and tells you can't submit it. So another way to deal with this as well is the personal page. Right now, the person can enter ASDF into the personal page. Whoops. Stop writing stupid numbers. They can enter ASDF into the personal page and submit, but it's not a valid URL, right? So we definitely want a valid URL. And we could use pattern matching for this particular one, but instead, they already have the URL data type built in. So we're just going to add, I wish when I double clicked it would select it, URL. We'll refresh, ASDF, ASDF, ASDF @asdf.com. Just click up. And then the personal page, if I add ASDF and click submit, it's going to say please enter a URL. So it's looking for a schema. So whether that's HTTP or HTTPS, doesn't matter. You must have a schema. You have to have a domain. It doesn't even have to have a subdomain though. Like you don't need the subdomain, but you have to have at least a domain, right? So domain, and then you have to have a top level domain like .com or .ca or something like that. But again, I don't think it matters. Like you can just literally type anything after the dot and it matches that pattern. So this is cool. This kind of gives us some validation on our rule sets. We can get more, I don't know what the word I'd be looking for. We can become stricter and actually do more, processing through to ensure things are working. We could, connect this up to APIs, for example, and be like, does this URL actually exist? Does this email actually exist? Or connect to LinkedIn and say, this personal page that you included, is it actually a live LinkedIn post page? And does it belong to the username and last name that's currently being in here? We can get really crazy, but at the end of the day, none of it matters. Is there a way that the user is required to have .com at the end? Yeah, you could force it with pattern matching. So we could make it, we could add a pattern, and we could say, they can have whatever they want at the beginning, right? But no, let's make it very simple. .com. There we go, with a $sign. So if I do this, it says basically that they have to have .com before the end of the string. That's it. So if I refresh ASDF, ASDF, ASDF at ASDF.com, age 45, personal page, let's try http:// domain.asdf, and I hit submit. It shouldn't match the pattern. See, please match the requested format. But if I change that to .com now and hit submit, it's not going to work. Maybe the $sign's weird. It may not support it. I think it's a really lightweight pattern match. I don't think it matches properly. Like it doesn't use regular expression to do it. Regular expression. That's pretty funny. Let's see if that worked. No, it just keeps breaking. I don't think I have to escape the dot. You know what? This is a rabbit hole. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. But yeah, and exactly like Elizabeth says, what about CA? What about org, .net, etc.? There's so many of them that you can match. Like, for example, I have a website that I use for education, and it's called scm.education. So you can't even use .education. Like, you would have to match so many, there's just no point. You might as well just do it this way, where it's just like take this pattern thing out altogether, match your max length, and match that it matches the URL, and just leave it at that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like on.ca, right? Yeah. For those of you that went to school in Ontario, you've probably encountered that, or if you've used any of the government websites, on.ca. Like that's exactly an example of that. So yeah, you definitely have to be cautious of those things. I think the URL, the way it's matching, is just the way we should do it, just with the regular URL. All right, so here's the last thing I'm going to show you when it comes to forms and why none of this means squat. Right? So I've got all these things in here. I'm going to submit my form. No, it didn't work, but I'm the hacker supreme. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to choose inspect. I'm now into the code base for my client. Woohoo, look at me hack. Here's my form, right? I can see this form thing. I'm just going to double click up here, and I'm going to put my cursor at the end, and I'm going to write no validate. Bam. Yay, I'm a hacker. And then I'm going to click submit. I hacked your form. And I hacked it by just adding no validate, which is an HTML attribute. Right? Woohoo, look at us hack. And I didn't have to worry about any of this stuff coming up. Now, there are ways around that as well. You can turn around and take a form and you can make it served by React, for example, or JavaScript. Calling 911 now. You can make it served by React or JavaScript, for example, and then the form isn't even visible to them, right? It's not even visible to them if they disable JavaScript. If they add the no validate, you can look for it using JavaScript and be like, I'm not submitting your form because you added no validate. But that's the problem, though. They can circumvent all of this by simply curling or using hopscotch or using Postman and directly writing to your database or directly writing to your process script with a post request. They don't need to go through your form at all, right? So none of this means squat. All it is user experience. So what you're doing right now is providing a good user experience so that when the user clicks submit, they're not doing a round robin, right? They're not going to the database, going to the process script, hitting an error, coming back, fixing the error, going back to the thing, back and forth. This kind of tells them the information they need to know right away. So, any questions about client-side validation? None? Nice. All right. Yeah, exactly. It is fairly straightforward stuff. There's a lot of this stuff in that link that Jess provided with the constraints. That shows you a whole bunch of these little tags or attributes that you can add that provide more robustness. There's a tel tag as well for, verifying telephone numbers. There's a whole bunch of them, actually. I always just type in HTML5 form validation attributes. and go to Moz, because I love Moz. So yeah, there's like required, min length, min, max type, pattern, right? Then there's a whole bunch of other ones. Let me find the list. I always use tell to find the list. Oh, we're doing some JavaScript stuff here. Oh, this is not the correct list. Where's the correct list? Maybe it's in the constraint one. Yeah, here you go. So I'll copy this into the chat. Yeah. So this tells you the attribute that you're adding and what it does. So there's the pattern, right, that you want to add. So the input types that are supported for using pattern are text, search, URL, tell, email, password. So that's why it wouldn't work with number, because pattern is not supported with number. You have to use it with one of these types. So the type is the type that you see here, your input type. Okay. Min, which tells you how it works. You can also provide a range or just a single number. So you could do min and then give it another line. I don't know how that one actually works. How do you give it a range? So you can also do min dates as well, which is pretty cool. How do you do the range? I don't see it. Maybe it's in this. Oh, you can do a type range and then give min max. I see. Never mind. You still need min max in order to do the range. Required, right? Step, which we looked at, min length, max length. So pretty much everything we did. There is no other ones. But there are a whole bunch of different types, right? Like input types. So you have URL and email, but then you also have tell. You have search. You have password, which you guys have likely used before. Maybe you haven't used password. That's where it kind of stars out your password as you type. Yeah, range would be nice for an age, so that you could just choose the range of the age. Yep. So these are all super helpful for doing client-side validation. And then there's client-side validation libraries available as well. A whole bunch of them. Tons and tons and tons of them. And they all create nicely styled versions of validation. Some of them, you know, like add little blocks underneath so that when you hit submit, it would put this little block under here, here, and here, telling you that all three of those fields are required. Right? So that you would know which ones to fill out, and then as you fill them out, it would automatically clear. There's some really nice validation libraries as well that allow two fields to be constrained to each other. So say I had a password and a password confirmation field, and they both need to match. There's validation libraries that ensure that that match happens, right? And they tell the user that before they ever submit. But once again, none of this means squat to you as a back-end programmer, because once you get the data, you can never, ever, ever, ever trust it, right? Never trust that the data is okay. Make sure you're always validating against it. All right, so that is our break point. So let's take a small break for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 5:05, and then we'll get into server-side validation. And then that will take us to the end of the night. All right? So I'll probably still be around, but I'll mute for that time. I got to answer some messages. All right, and we're back. Okay, so far all we have done is client validation, right? And validation is absolutely crucial to the integrity of our application and the security of our registered users, right? So we're securing for both users and us. That's the whole purpose. They should, like, hackers can utilize our system as well. I've had students say, why do I need to protect against a hacker? I don't really care, you know, I'm not really doing all that much. There's big reasons why. Like, for example, a hacker can utilize your system to store other information on it that you are now liable for, right? So this has happened to people before in the past, where a hacker has actually stored sensitive illegal data on another person's computer or on another person's server, and then that person was charged for having that data. That happens. So you got to be careful, and you need to protect yourself against those things. They can also use your servers as proxy attacks, right? So you've heard of DDoSing or DOSing before, I'm sure. That's basically utilizing a group of computers in order to create an attack against another service. So your computer can get utilized in that attack, and then it becomes this legal issue where you can be held responsible because that happened, right? Sometimes they just commit vandalism, so they'll go to your site and they'll load up a whole bunch of extra stuff and it's just vandalism, or they'll load up spam, right? So that when people go to your site, they're encountered with all this spam, or they'll use your server as a way to email out, right? So they can write new scripts and then email out to other people, or they're stealing information from your users. Either way, it is your responsibility as a computer programmer to make sure that you are validating at the very basic level, at least validating your server data that's coming in, so that you're not, accidentally exposing sensitive data out to other people. One thing that hackers really like to do, and you may not have thought of this before, they like to hack very easy to hack websites like students' email, or like students' databases and stuff, because if they can get the emails and passwords out of that database, often people will use the same email password combination for other services, right? So they may have registered to your little blog with their email and password, and if I get that email and password, I now might be able to access their Netflix, access their Amazon account, access their Google, their Gmail, their Hotmail, Facebook, whatever it is. I might be able to use those details to access those things because it's likely the same email and password combination. Now, these other companies have done a little bit more due diligence by creating two-factor authentication, forced verifications, stuff like that, which definitely helps mitigate that problem. But it is something to be aware about. You don't want to be part of the problem. You want to be part of the solution, so to speak. Not to sound like a lecture, but you definitely want to be a part of the solution. So make sure you're validating your data. Okay, so there are several types of validation that we're going to look at, and we're going to do this fairly quick. So let's close off our form. We've got our form all ready to go. Our next step... Hold on, where's my page? Here it is. Our next step is to actually deal with what happens to the data when we create a contact. So if I type in a name and an email address, give it an age or don't, doesn't matter, and a personal page, and hit submit, now I have passed through the client-side data. I need to deal with the client-side data. So let's go to process.php, which is just pretty much an empty page. We have this like header section in here, and that's about it. We're going to write our code in this block here. So what I'm going to write in here first is I just want to know the data that I've got. So I'm sure Jess has talked to you about debugging before and being able to view your data. So we're just going to write a simple var dump and output the post. So the post is where the data is actually currently sitting. It's in the post. So you have to hit continue. It's in the post global associative array. Have you guys talked about these associative arrays? Post, get, session, server. Yes? Okay, good. So yeah, that data winds up getting stored in the post associative array. So that's cool. I can see my data here, so now I kind of know what I'm going to be working with as I go ahead and set up my pieces. So the first piece we're going to do is sanitization, and you've already been kind of doing this with Jess. Where you do that filter input, it actually that's actually filtering your data as you go through, which will guarantee that the data is there, I think is how it's working. Oh yeah, it's filter validating. Sorry, no, we're going to sanitize it as we pull it out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to treat this processing page as though it will process edits as well as creates. Okay, so updates and inserts. We'll do both in this same thing. So we're definitely going to look for an ID. We'll run filter input here. We'll pass in the input post, the key that we're looking for, right? But then we're going to add another piece to this. We're going to add filter sanitize underscore number int. What that will do is it will take, if there is a value, it will take the value and it will force it to be an integer. If it can't force it to be an integer, for some reason it's a string and it just returns nan, which is not a number, then it will just set it as false. So either, actually we'll set it as null. Either we will get a number or we will get null. So that actually sanitizes that information so that we can see it properly. And we can actually var dump that so we can kind of see what's going to happen. Because we don't have an ID, we should get back null. See? Null. Now if ID actually had a value to it, which we can kind of force. So that's roughly what it would look like, because it'll be a string, because that's just what happens when you send from a form. If I hit refresh, it should say 5. I wonder if this is causing a problem. Let's try setting this as 5, a hard-coded number, and maybe that will change that. I know I did this before. I'm going to keep getting null. Maybe I can't override it. I might not be able to override and add the data in because this is not picking up from here, I bet. It's probably picking it up from something else. That's kind of weird. This is, by the way, this syntax, this input post syntax, I have never used this before. Like, literally ever. No, because it doesn't actually cache it, Scott. It won't cache server-side requests. Yeah, so this syntax is the first time I've ever seen this syntax before. I've never used it, but I'm kind of happy like Jess uses it because it's cool. I like it. It's neat. All right, we'll go through the rest and we'll see what happens here. So let's do fname. I like to make sure all my variables and everything are the same names. I know that you guys have called this first name before, but I just like to make them all the same. Fname equals filter. Oh, what did I use before? I just literally read it off the post object. So I would just read it directly from the post object and use the post object. That's what I did. I like this better though, because this actually will take it and then assign it out, and if it doesn't exist, it doesn't blow up. Whereas if you try to access it from the post object and it doesn't exist, it will blow up. So you have to do extra conditional logic. This avoids that, so I don't have to do the extra conditional logic. So this is input. Again, input post. This thing I'm using, by the way, that wants to fill this information in for me is called tab9 and is an extension available for VS Code. It is super handy because it just fills in that data for you so easily. So this filter sanitize this time will not be a number, it will be a string. So what that will do is if the name came through and it had a bunch of tag information, like say they tried to submit it with a bunch of, you know what, I'll just show you. I'll show you what I mean. So when I run this, we can see the name here is ASDF. Sorry, this is kind of hard to see. The name here is ASDF, right? Because that's what I had passed. But if I take the name, and I'll add in script, let's just do an alert. All right, I have a limit. I have a limit to the number of things I can add. What if I can get A in there? Oh no, but I need quote characters. Ah! I don't have enough space. Yeah, I don't have enough space. Let's just put some script tags in. We'll just add the script tags and we'll submit that. So if I add the script tags, notice this is now empty. And that's because that sanitization actually strips out those script tags so that it's only a string. Yeah, boom, foiled. That's true. I have been foiled. So we'll just put that back to ASDF. So sanitized string, super cool because it's literally the thing responsible for stripping out any of that possible hacker stuff like string or like scripts, SQL injection data, stuff like that. If it doesn't like the character, it will encode it differently so that it doesn't happen or doesn't cause an issue. So I'm not sure if you guys know about this, but if you put your cursor here anywhere on this line, doesn't matter where on the line, right, and then hit Alt-Shift down, it will actually duplicate that line down for you, which makes it easy to go ahead and replace this information with L-name because it's the same. And then one step further, if you double-click on F-name so it's highlighted, the second one, not the first one, just the second one, and then hit Control-D, it will create two cursors for you, and then you can type in L-name, like so. Yeah, it might be Control-D to duplicate the line. I absolutely love multi-cursor, and you're going to see me do it often. You can create multiple cursors by just holding the Alt key, and you can create all the cursors you want. Hello! And then type in hello in like 6 different spots. I use multi-cursor. I use my browser to its fullest extent. Or my browser, my IDE. Age is a little bit different. Age is closer to what we're doing with ID, so I'm going to hit Alt-Shift, and then I'm just going to hold the Alt key down, release Shift, and press down to move it down through the list. Then I'm going to change the word ID to age. So now I have age, and it's still that same information. I'm not sure if Jess showed you this, but you can var dump multiple values by just using a comma, which is super handy when you want to see all of the values at once. So here we go. Here's all our values. They all get their own little scaling thing, scroll bar. So null for ID, ASDF for this string, ASDF for this string, and 42 for this string. And the last one we need to do, again, we'll just take one of the strings. It doesn't matter which one. I'm going to hit Alt-Shift and down and press Alt and press down just so I can bring it to the bottom. And I'm going to change L-name to URL because they are URLs. And then I'll add that to my var dump. And there we go. So the good news is that all this data currently is not going to allow us to wind up getting hacked via cross-site scripting. However, it's not making us impervious to things like SQL injection quite yet, though it should remove most of the information. I don't think there is a sanitized URL. I could be wrong, though. Let me try. Oh, there is. Nice. I didn't know that. Is there a sanitized... Oh, where's my email? We never added the email. We need that too. Let's take L-name, Alt-Shift down, and change that to email. Yeah, we should have 6 values altogether. Now, I don't think there's a sanitized email, is there? There is. There is a sanitized email. So what I like to do in my other class as well, I like to copy the code that I've got. I always post the name of the script that I'm working in. So that's the first line. And then I post the code that I just created. So that makes it easier, and then we can kind of move at a fast pace so that if you do get behind, you're not totally behind because you can copy and paste that code if you need to. So this sanitizes our values. It makes it so that our values are all what we're expecting. We need to add email here. It makes it so that our values, well, not necessarily what we're expecting, but it will strip out any cross-site scripting. It will also strip out any HTML. So if you're expecting HTML to come in, you need to be aware that sanitized string will remove all of the HTML. The other thing these sanitize will do is if it's not in an email format, it will actually reject this. If it's not in a URL format, it will reject this. Okay? So we should look at that and what that looks like. I'm just going to click back button here, and I'm actually going to open up my form and turn off validation by coming up here to the top where I have my form tag and writing in no validate and saving it. So now validation is turned off on my form. If I refresh, this form no longer has validation. If I hit submit, all of these are null, but notice we don't have any errors being called, right? They're just empty. Empty. If I type in ASDF in all of these fields, which we know we're not allowed to do, right? We need an actual email address. We'll add a great big number, ASDF, and hit submit. Some of these will have values, right? ASDF, ASDF, ASDF as my email address, 2333334, and ASDF is my URL. That's surprising. So even with the filter sanitize email and filter sanitize URL, it is irrelevant because they still get passed through. Yes, we're going to use filter validate in a minute, actually. We're going to use both of these things. So that's our next step, actually, is to go through and validate our code. So that comes into validation. So the first thing I want to validate is that I have data, right? That these required fields have been filled out and that they're not missing their data. And there's a few ways we could do that. We could write this: if $fname equals blah, then we should actually create a place to write errors to. So we'll create an array, and we'll store our errors in our array. We'll say array push $errors, so this will add a new error to that array, or a new item to that array. First name is required. And then we'll var dump $errors as well, but we'll dump it underneath here in a new dump. Okay. So if I go to my form and refresh and hit submit, we can see here that in our error array, we have first name is required. The problem is that I need to validate 3 fields, and that would mean that I would have to write it 3 times. Yes, Alex, it entirely would. You're getting ahead of me. We're going to do it properly here in a second. I have to write these 3 fields 3 times. So I'm going to write it out 3 times, and then I'm going to show you how to condense it. Actually, that's problematic. I kind of want to show you variable variables, but I don't want to show you variable variables because I don't want to be confusing. All right, you know what? We're just going to keep this the way it is, but we are going to clean it up with what Alex suggested. So we're going to change this to empty instead and validate fname, like so. And then we'll do the same thing for lname. And we'll push our error. Last name is required. And then the last one we'll do it through is for email. I'm really loving tab 9 and how fast that makes things. Sorry, what does array push do? So what array push does is it actually takes this value and adds it as a new item to the errors array. So there's an easier way to write this so it's shorter. The way we write it so it's shorter is we write $errors with square brackets and make them equal to that. That is the same thing as calling array push. So those are the same thing. I do prefer the shorthand, but I wanted to show you this way in case that's what Jessica covered. I guess you guys haven't done array pushing yet? So for email, we also need to validate that the email is in the correct format. So the way I generally do that is I do if filter, I thought it was filter var. It is filter var. Okay. If filter var email, so the thing I want to check, and then the name of the filter. So it's filter validate email. And then this whole thing, we want to reverse its expression, right? So if the email is not in the invalid format, it's going to return false, which will not let this if condition execute. Hopefully you guys understand the whole idea of true and false and how it works with conditional statements. So I'm going to add a not operator in front of it, which reverses this value, whatever Boolean value comes back, to being true if it's false and false if it's true. And with that one, I'm going to say array push $errors. Email is not in a valid format. You guys have done array push in Java? Yeah. It's a bit different though, right? Because PHP is loosey-goosey, so you can literally push on whatever value you want. Whereas in Java, it has to be the same data type each time. In PHP, we can push a number, we can push strings, we can push whatever we want. Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. JavaScript is a little bit closer to what you're used to, but again, still very loose. There's no strictness in that language either. So there's no like class, so you don't define types. But there is a strict version of JavaScript called TypeScript that you can do as well, which people coming from Java really like TypeScript. Yeah. I still need to learn it, actually. Still haven't taken the opportunity to learn TypeScript. All right, so this checks to see if it's empty. This checks to see if it's in the valid format. So let's refresh. Sure enough, first name is required. Last name is required. Email is required, and email is not in the valid format. So we're batting 1,000, so to speak, here. Now we need to do some small validations, right? We do need to check to see if age, if it's present, is in the valid format, right? We don't care if it's empty. So if it's empty, we're not going to do anything about it. But if it isn't empty and it's defined, we want to make sure it's in the valid format. So we're going to say if not empty, $, $age. So if age is not empty, which I think it is. See, that's the thing. It returns a string, so I'm hoping that's applicable. If it's not empty, and this needs to be reversed as well, filter var $age. And I want to validate that it's a number. So that would be filter validate int. That's what I want to do. I want to validate that it's a number. If it's not, then we're going to array push, but we'll do this in the nice shorthand going forward here. I hope you guys are okay with that. Age must be an integer. Like so. So if I refresh, I should see that error message. See, I had this problem when I was writing this lesson, and it had something to do with what happens to age by this thing, which was weird. So I had to change this to the post version. And then it worked. It's not working any which way. It's telling me that age is not empty. So if that happens to you, the easiest way to debug it, to see what's going on, yes, it does return all values as string, but empty actually checks to see if it's an empty string, if it's false, if it's null, if it's, I think that's it. Undefined. So it kind of like covers all the bases. But what's happening right now is it's basically saying that age contains a value. So I'm just going to output both of these just to see what's in there. See if there's actually a value there. And we're getting a string. Is that line 34? No, that's line 39. Where's line 34? Line 34. That's... Oh, it'd be at the top. Duh. See, it's empty. There's nothing in there. So why it's not working? Oh, because it's empty. Long day. Not reading my own logic. Let's go put something in there. Oh boy. Alright, let's go put something in there that isn't a... Can't put A in there. I need A in there. So I think this time I can actually set the value, because that will carry over. So we'll add ASDF in there. You won't see it in the form, but it will carry over. So if I click submit, let's just see if it actually came over. No, it didn't actually come over. So that's a hard one to test without actually going to the form and changing the age from type number to type text, which is pretty much what I have to do in order to figure that one out. So there we go. See, that's weird. It's definitely... Oh, I know why. I know why. Didn't think that through. It's our sanitize. Our sanitize is taking our integer, because it is not an integer, it's returning it as an empty string. So that's cool, because that's actually already combating any issues if it wasn't an integer. So this actual validation is not necessary, because it's just redundant and it's never going to happen, right? So if they submit something other than a number, it's always going to get converted to an empty string, which ideally would be nice if it just converted it to null and not an empty string, but whatever, we take what we get. So instead we'll just clear that out. The other one we will do, though, is we need to validate the range. That is true, actually. That is true. So let's do that. So we'll say if not empty, $age, right? And if, this is two things, though. If $age, we'll put it in here, $age is greater than or equal to 18, and $age is less than or equal to 130. So there we go. I like to kind of put it in a second set of parentheses, because you understand that that's a separated thing. Filter var age filter validate int 18 130. Does filter validate int accept a range? I didn't know that. It does. That's pretty cool. I didn't actually know it expected a range. Let's do that. So if not filter var $age filter validate int and 18 and 130. Then we'll do $errors equals age must be between 18 and 130. And actually, we need to do one more thing here. We also need to make sure that it's not empty, because if it's empty, we don't want to run that validation, right? Because they're not required to pass age, so we don't need to make sure that it's there. So why don't we go add an age of 9, submit. Oh, boom, filter var expects at most 3 parameters, 4 given. How did you write it? So it's not 18130 comma. It must be in a weird way. Does it actually pop up when I hit the comma? It takes options in a thing. Well, what does that look like? Value is an integer, optionally from the specified range, and converts to an int on success. So you need min range and max range. How do you do those though? Options. So maybe, if I'm right, this is already getting super tricky. You actually did just 18, 130 and it worked for you? Or did you have to put them inside a block? Can you paste your line? Filter var. Alright, I'm going to copy your code. I'm going to plagiarize. Here we go. No, I shouldn't have to restart my browser. That's not a thing. Oh, you guys are using the, like, the 4 tab space, eh? Don't see the difference. Yeah, I was going to say the square brackets would make sense to me if you were to define a range, because it kind of works that way in my mind. Yeah, that's exactly... No, you see, but it didn't pick it up, even though I had passed in 9. You know what? I'll review that, and I'll come back to you, because it's kind of weird. I bet you there's a weird way to do it. I have a funny feeling you have to pass these as an associative array with min and max defined, but we're at 538, and we're not quite done, and we need to get done. We're likely not even going to post this stuff into the database. We're likely just going to set up all of our sanitizations and filters, and then we'll be done. All right, so the last thing we want to do is after we have all of our validations, we kind of need to be able to say, hey, something is wrong, and throw an error, right? So we have our sanitizations, we have our validations. Now we're going to take a look and see if there's an error, and if there is, then we're going to respond by saying, hey, you've got an error. So the easiest way to do that, if we say, if count $errors is greater than 0, right? Meaning you have an error, then we'll output all those errors. So we're going to use a for each loop because it is an array. So $errors as $error, like so. And we're going to echo out a p tag basically that just has the error message in. Now I have noticed, have you guys used string templates yet inside this class? So there's concatenation, right? Okay, so there's concatenation, which allows you to concatenate a value. So here's our error, right? That works. So here we go. Email is required. Email is not in a valid format. First name is required. Last name is required, kind of thing, right? This is concatenated. And then there's string templates, which is we put in a set of curly braces, and then we output our variable between the curly braces. So it just all sits inside these quotes, and it still parses the variable. Yeah, you've concatenated but not used the template. Template literals is what they're called. I call them string templates, whatever, yeah. Same thing. Interpolated strings is actually what they are. But yeah, so you guys haven't done interpolated strings. This is an interpolated string. Yeah, I like it. It's a lot cleaner. What I don't like is spitting PHP and HTML in a string. That's gross to me. I don't like doing that. But all right, the last thing we need to do is a little bit of normalization before we shove everything into a database. So the way we do the normalization is I'm just going to normalize the F name and the L name. We're going to use a function called mbConvertCase, which I never knew about, but I found on Stack Overflow, and I kind of like it because I was doing it the hard way, like a peasant. Now we're going to do it the easy way. Now this doesn't take into effect things like, for example, my name, right? This will capitalize the first letter of each word automatically for you. But my last name is McKinnon, so it has this capital K here, right? Or names like O'Leary or something like that with the apostrophe. It won't capitalize the L. It would leave it lowercase. So if you wanted that kind of control, you would have to write the logic for that. And then we can do mbConvertCase, $L name, like so, and do mbCaseTitle. Same thing. And now if we look at these things, which they're not going to show us anything, let's add some data here. ASDF. Let's actually add an email. We'll make this 98. And HTTP asdf.com. There we go. So we have no errors now. So if we look, it's capitalized the A on ASDF, right? These are nicely capitalized. We have our email address. We have our numbers. We have our URL. See, that's the way I used to do it. UC first string to lower F name. To me, that works too, but that requires 2 function calls, right? This is only 1 function call. I don't know if under the hood this does the same thing, or if this is written more efficiently. We would have to benchmark it in order to see. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about negligible though, right, Alex? Like maybe 1 nanosecond more than the other. Yeah. So sometimes you got to kind of look like, yeah, it's efficient, but hey, readability goes out the window, so maybe it's not as good as it should be. All right, so that shows you validation, normalization, and sanitization. We talked about validation on the forms. We've talked about validation and sanitization on the back end. Sanitization allows us to basically purify our data and remove any potential hostile problems in our data, as well as purify the type, right? So that an integer is an integer, a string is a string, a URL is a URL, and an email is an email address. That's the wonderful benefits of sanitization. Validation makes sure that required fields are actually being submitted. Plus, email addresses are in an actual valid email format. And the integers are in the valid format as well, even though this did not work. But I will figure that out to make it work. Then we count our errors, and if we have any errors, we go ahead and call on that. Validation does not stop with this, though. When we start looking at more database things, for example, unique columns, right? Like when we create a user, we want that username to always be unique and not be duplicated. When that happens and we're looking for that, we need to validate that, right? But that's going to involve our database, where we have to actually reach out to the database and look for that username first, see if it's there, and if it is, then tell the user that they need to choose another username, right? Or taking a look at password patterns, that's another one where we would actually use pattern matching to kind of verify that the password meets the expected password constraints, right? Stuff like that. So there are other validations that you're going to need to look into as well, plus sanitizations, but we'll be doing this all the time as we go forward in the course. So we'll always be validating, we'll always be sanitizing, and we'll always be normalizing, right? That being said, I will take the code that I finished, right? Not this code, but my actual instructor code, and I will push that up to Git for you so that you have it. I will do that right now in front of you so that you can see it. So I'm going to call this comp 1006 Wednesday 02 lesson 08. So a very, very nice long name. Yeah, that's the way I thought it was. So you could get rid of the array brackets there, Attila, and change those to just square brackets around it, and that would also work if you wanted to do it easily. So you would have, so you would have square bracket options and then square bracket array. Let's see here. That's it. Create the repository. Let me go find this data. See, I taught this in lesson 5. So they're not ahead of you though, which is interesting. You guys have covered things that we haven't covered. It's just in different orders is all. I'm gonna git bash here. I don't know what you guys are using for a shell. I use git bash. I think you guys use PowerShell. Whoops, helps if you init. And add my origin. Nice. Git push -u. And let that go up. There we go. And there's our code. So I will copy that and I'll put that into Blackboard under code examples. And there you are. And that's it. That's all I have for you tonight. You guys are welcome to jump off unless you have any questions. Yeah, shoot, Jesse.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm running into a problem with MB convert case. It's strange because it's showing up in my VS Code like when I hover over it, but then when I run the code it says it's a call to an undefined function, MB convert case. I just wondered if you had any idea why that might be happening.
Yeah, potentially you have a weird PHP version. What PHP which Apache server thing are you using? Are you using WAMP, MAMP, or XAMPP, or what are you using?
Yeah, so I am using a weird thing. Then I thought that might be it. I actually installed them all side by side, so I've gone into the configs, and it must be something in there.
So if you look in your config, sometimes what's weird, like even if you're running PHP 7.3, for example, it's possible that MB convert is not turned on. That the MB library has been turned off, and you might have to turn it on.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, no problem, Alex. No problem, Steph. Nice to meet you all. See you next week. Bye. Yeah, no problem, Scott. My pleasure. So, Crisato, the difference, there's not a lot of difference actually between the two. The reason why I like the way Jess is doing it is because it is potential, there's potential for $_post age to not exist. So post is an associative array that is created by the PHP, well, it's actually created, it's created by the PHP binary when you go to send your form. So when you take this contact, let me zoom out a bit. When you take this contact and you submit it, PHP takes all of this data that goes into the request body and turns it into this thing called the post array, right? And then in the post array, you have an example to look at that post array and use those data pieces. The problem is that they can be empty and not existing. So I kind of feel like this method that Jess is using makes way more sense because then you don't have to worry about values in the post array not existing. This kind of guarantees it, because if fname, for example, doesn't exist, then this just gets set with a null value. So it's not a big deal. So this definitely makes more sense to use than using the post array. Sir, could you help me with trying to launch our example code? I can share my screen. Yes, for sure. Yeah, no problem, Chisato. Let me stop sharing my screen. Let me make sure I have sharing turned on, though. I don't actually know if I turned it on. Sometimes I forget. Yes, you can share.
Okay, sounds good. I'll still share my screen now. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, so as you can see, like I tried to pull my localhost, so this is my localhost homepage.
Yep.
So File Explorer. So I tried to like this directory and then put it into my search bar. Some access was forbidden.
So how have you been loading code up before this week, out of curiosity? Like, show me what you would do to load up the code that you did for Jess's last class.
Oh, so I'll just like put it in FileZilla, then like